keynote talk by Michael Pettis, full house, great audience participation already. So we warmed up nicely and are looking forward to a really exciting weekend. Oh, thank you. That's better. I don't have to shout so loud. So we'll be kicking off this event with a panel discussion with our expert guests who will be talking about the UK's relationship with China, hearing from a really fantastic set of experts about their hot takes on how to navigate this extremely important and I think increasingly tricky relationship to navigate. Afterwards, we'll open up to Q&A, and I want to make everyone aware that this event is being recorded, so please, if there are things that you would not like to be shared, the Q&A might not be the place for those comments. But before we begin, we are very honoured to be joined by our Vice-Chancellor and President, Professor Kshitij Kapoor, to share his opening remarks on this China Week.
Thank you, Astrid, and a very warm welcome to all who have gathered here today. For those for whom of you this is your first time here at King's, you are in what is called the Great Hall of King's. King's, as you might know, is a 200-year-old university, and when it was founded, the idea was to create a great hall to actually convene public debate. So the earliest debates here were about the ideas of evolution. In fact, it was really fiery when that idea came up here. They suggested that women please leave, and I'm not making it up. It was thought to be so radical that it was thought, no, it's a men-only lecture, but that was the 1850s. But look, this is a hall that has seen many great debates, many great ideas talked about, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here. This is our fourth China Week, and probably the biggest and the most exciting. And we're excited to draw together thinkers and researchers on the issue of China from across the world. Someone once said about gravity, and they said, you can ignore gravity, but you know what? Gravity doesn't ignore you. And I think in many ways, that is the role of China. You may not think China influences your life because you're not a China scholar, but it does. And I was just thinking, if you got up in the morning and had coffee or tea, and you looked around your kitchen, think about that. China's probably contributed to half of that. Then you probably took a vehicle to come here, and if it was an EV, it is most likely that China had something to do with it. And then you came to your place of work. Your places of work have changed dramatically. Mine has. I'm here at the university. We're fortunate to have nearly 5,000 students from China who are here, who certainly weren't here even about 20 years ago. So workplaces are changing. The nature of work is changing because of how China is contributing to this world. So it's only fitting that China's economic, security, and political role would be one of the greatest geopolitical issues of our time. And the Lao China Institute exists to bring together a diverse group of scholars who are working on these issues. And I think when we put together our academic staff, our affiliates, our students and supporters, we're now one of the largest such institutes in Britain and Europe. Now, I had the privilege of traveling to China earlier this year with Professor Kerry Brown, and I'm no scholar of geopolitical events. Those were the things that Kerry talked about and will probably say more about through this week. But I do know a thing or two about medicine. I am a physician and a neuroscientist, and I certainly understand STEM much better. And I have to tell you, I was really gobsmacked, and I don't know what other word I would use, for the pace and scale of development of STEM subjects in China. In 2003, on average, the Chinese research output in terms of quality was about a half of the United Kingdom. In 2011, 2012, it was about at par. Today, it is 4 to 5 times what UK's output is. And then Kerry got some stats together, and we spend about something like 25 billion on R&D. China's spending upwards of 320 billion on R&D. So it's not surprising that you would see this huge increase in size and scale. But what was striking to me was the increase in quality in a decade. And I won't go on about it, but I would encourage those of you who are interested in China as that to look up something called the Critical Technology Tracker. It's on the web if you do Critical Technology Tracker. It's published by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. It tracks the world's leading countries on 44 technologies. If you went there 20 years ago, China was not leading in any technology. Today, it leads in 37 out of 44 technologies, and that's the United States and UK included. It is the world leader in all of these technologies. So clearly something absolutely remarkable at pace is happening in this very interesting part of the world. And therefore, I think it's only fitting that we devote time to understand it, to study it, to learn from it, and to actually observe and, to the right way, critique it. So this week we have 40 expert speakers across 17 events who are exploring the China model and the ways in which the world and China can have a dialogue about their respective strategies of development and sustainability. So I welcome you to that week, and I welcome you back, Astrid. Thank you for being with us at the Great Hall.
Then with no further ado, I invite our panelists up. Thank you very much, Shitty. I welcome Rex Lee, Stephen Lynch, and Winnie King up to the stage. Now, while they make their way up, I am going to introduce our panelists.
Okay.
I'm going to do swapperoonies in the order you guys get to speak, so all good. So, well, in order of appearance in that case, or order from me anyway, I want to introduce Winnie King, who's a senior lecturer in Chinese international political economy at the University of Bristol, as well as director at the UK National Committee on China and an associate of the Centre for Science and Policy at the University of Cambridge. And she's a specialist in Chinese strategies of economic development and has been working on Sino-UK political and economic relations and Britain's China policy for over 10 years. She has served as a parliamentary academic fellow in the House of Commons Library as a China specialist. And so we look forward to hearing about her takeaways from that time in House of Commons as well. To her left, we have Stephen Lynch, who is Executive Director of the Eastern Powerhouse, Director of Beijing to Britain, and Chairman of the IOD China Group. And he was recently awarded an MBE. Congratulations, Stephen, for his services to the British business community in China in His Majesty the King's 2024 New Year's Honours. I think we should give him a clap, right?
It's genuinely excruciating to hear a bio read out about yourself.
Oh, milk it. Stephen is the former managing director of the British Chamber of Commerce in China and has returned to the UK after 12 years, I believe, in Beijing. He's a strategic leader with extensive experience in international relations, public policy, and government affairs strategies. And he'll be the one who's really on the ball with the business side of the equation tonight, I think. And finally, we have Rex Lee, who's a research affiliate of the Lau China Institute here at King's College London. He was a professor of international relations at Liverpool John Moores University and a research associate of the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University in Sweden. And he has lectured at the Defence Academy here in the UK, King's College as well. And Rex's research focuses on identity construction and security discourse, Asia-Pacific security, China's foreign relations, as well as US-China-Russia relations and UK-China bilateral relations as well. And we look forward to hearing Rex talk a bit more about that wider global context today as well. So with those introductions made, I will invite this lovely expert panel to give us what I hope will be a bit of a stock take on where we are in UK-China relations, and also to try to be quite explicit and open about what we can and should be doing for different UK actors to have a better relationship with Chinese counterparts, whatever they take that better to look like. We'll try to touch on both the kind of politics side, business side, and then the people-to-people side of that equation. So if we start off then with the political side of things, you go and take a glass of water before we start. Nobody, of course, can accuse the previous Tory governments for having been overly consistent in their approach to China. But as we await what comes out of the new Labour government's China audit in the coming couple of weeks, there seems to be a rather open question about what the UK wants relations with China to look like. And Winnie, you've worked as a China expert close to government for a considerable time. I'd like to hear from you, what do you think are the key challenges that are facing the Labour government as they come to the end of their first 100 days?
Okay. It's a big question. I think, thank you. I think it's very important to remember there's a difference between government and parliament. Mm-hmm. So I was a parliamentary academic fellow with the International Affairs and Defense section in the House of Commons Library. I was their China specialist. And I have done some work with FCDO and science and tech and stuff like that. I think when it comes to the major challenges that Labour has, okay, I'm going to go back to your original point that you say about inconsistency within what the Tory governments in the past 14 years have. I wouldn't say there's been a lot of inconsistency. I think the main issue is the fact that there hasn't been a significant amount of leadership, and that's consistent. And the reason I say this is because the overarching dynamic that kind of is the major umbrella that overshadows what the Labour government is going to have to face is that of shifting winds in geopolitics, okay? And there are certain things that we need to deal with, obviously, that dominate for geopolitics in the international arena, in terms of what we mean for our priority of norms and human rights, et cetera. But there's also things going on within our domestic arena with what happened post-Brexit, our efforts to try and formulate our own independent foreign policy, the extent to which we're able to achieve that, right? We know very much under the Tory government that there is a clear divide between those who are very hawkish on China, and they're very outspoken. We hear this a lot in the media as well. And this is something that the Labour government's going to have to continue to contend with because geopolitics has not shifted. If anything, it's gotten a bit worse, okay? In the international arena, we're dealing with increasing demands about what we want, what role China has to play, and therefore what does that mean for the UK in our own role on the global stage. And so there's a lot of tension between these two things that forces the Labour government to ultimately have to choose, yeah? What is it that they want? What are our national interests and what are our hierarchy of priorities? Rachel Reeves had made it very clear that it's about the economy and growth. It makes it very difficult then to exclude China from that, which has been a significant effort under the Tory government. And so when it comes to the domestic side, then that tension comes up again because we don't just have the government or the parliamentary side which calls for more or slower engagement or more cautious engagement, but we have the industry side, the technology side, which deals with the reality of higher costs of petrol or oil, the higher cost of living, and excluding China from the supply chains makes it particularly difficult in terms of how the voters and the public themselves actually engage on their daily lives. The last thing, is China itself. And it's the fact that China will, if we decide to take a step forward and actually engage with China, we have to understand China's expectations. When China engages in foreign policy and bilateral relations, it loves partners that are very, very consistent It loves partners that are reliable, be it in the area of diplomacy or business. And we have not been particularly consistent. Hinkley Point is a perfect example of that. So it's not about managing China's expectations in terms of, oh, how much are we going to engage with them? Because I think we need to shift our approach in terms of how we engage with China. But I think the key thing is managing expectations, China's expectations, which will be actually quite low. Their expectations of our relationship in terms of bilateral relations with the UK will not be very high, and that kind of thing is the kind of thing, that is a challenge that the UK government's going to have to contend with.
Thank you. And before I move on to Steve, could you tell us a little bit more, Winnie, about what that change should be, about how we engage with China?
Okay. The integrated review and the integrated review refresh that came out 2021 and 23, and the refresh, which hopefully will come out early 2025, yeah, has proposed a new position for the UK, which I think is actually quite important. I've been working on trying to figure out UK national interests for well over 10 years, particularly when it comes to China, right? And I think the refresh does help us do that. What we're missing is the nuance. In terms of, we identified certain priorities, but how are we going to get there, right? And so in terms of what is it that we need, I think we need to really, I guess, kind of reiterating what I said before, is we need to choose what those hierarchies are. We need to choose, okay, we have industrial policy, which has been identified theoretically today with national champions, and we need to commit. This is a long-term game. When it comes to engaging, not just with China, in terms of geopolitics and our relationship with the international economy, international political system. And these are the kind of things that have to come about, and with that requires investment. So we're talking about China-UK relations. It requires commitment that is not politicized financially, in order to promote and develop our capabilities and our capacity for engaging with China, for understanding China. For our new round of MPs, there's 355, I think, new MPs. Majority of them will not have any idea about China. Majority of them may not see that there actually is implications for our relationship with China for their local constituents, whether it has to do with investment, whether it has to do with jobs, whether it has to do with potential FDI, right, in certain sectors. And so what is deemed as a green light sector, what is deemed as amber or red, all of that needs to be decided. It then provides a basis upon which we can engage consistently with the Chinese, or separately from the Chinese if it's a red light, no-go sector. And if it is a no-go sector, then we need to develop some alternative, right? So it is an all-encompassing, long-term strategy. There you go.
Thank you. I'll move over then to Stephen, who I've asked a particularly kind of tricky question to prepare,
Great.
because it's a bit of a
Delighted.
crystal ball
Yeah.
question. I asked Stephen to think about what we should be expecting from the Labour government's engagement with China, and also whether you're optimistic about the prospects of meeting all these challenges that Winnie's just outlined.
I think anyone involved in the China relationship is neither optimistic nor pessimistic, so neutral. And I always remember from my time in Beijing, we'd do sentiment surveys, and the longer a business had been in there, the more neutral, they would be, because they'd seen waves, they've seen positives and negatives. So it's hard to say optimistic or pessimistic. I'm a more optimistic person, but again, I think you've got to view the relationship, and I think that the best way to view the relationship is from our former ambassador, Dame Barbara Woodward, who she said the relationship's built on DING, right? Three pillars: government to government, business to business, and people to people. The challenge with all of those kind of pillars is the geopolitics. The politics have now it sort of invaded every aspect of it, right? So when I was involved in business back in Beijing, you could separate the politics from the business. That's become incredibly challenging, both sides. There was, in China, it would be very difficult to separate. Now back here in the UK, it's incredibly difficult to separate the politics and the business. Everything's put through the lens of a national security. So I guess when we're looking at Labour, so as Winnie just mentioned, the former strategy under the government, and I personally would say it has been all over the place, so I wouldn't say it's a consistency thing. It's been, we had a golden generation to protect, align, engage, I think was the strategy, and now Labour's come in and it's challenge, compete and cooperate, which essentially is the same thing, right? It's continuity. And I think in every aspect, what the government is saying is, look, it's not a reset. This is absolutely not a reset, but this is around re-engagement. And so we've seen that already, right? We've seen Xi and Starmer have a call. We've seen Rachel Reeves. We're about to see David Lammy go over to China. I think the worry from many people here in the UK, and specifically with the sort of a national security lens, is we don't want engagement just for engagement's sake. We need to understand what we're getting out of this relationship, or what we want from the relationship. And so that was the point of the Labour audit. Now, anyone around China will say, what's the Labour audit? And anyone in government will say, well, what's the Labour audit? And I think there's a bit of confusion about what's coming out. It's not going to be done externally. It's going to be done internally. And what are they looking at? Are they looking at the entire relationship? Are they looking at the business relationship? Are they looking at the national security relationship? Are we looking at kind of civil society rights? You know, they're quite different things. And so the one thing I would say is we don't want to view that just through a lens of risk, because if you look for risk in China, you'll find risk really quickly. And then there come some very, very difficult trade-offs about what we need to do as a country. So in my mind, it would be take a step back. What do we want to be as a country post-Brexit? One of the things that really kind of shocked me in many ways, I was just in Beijing maybe 5-6 weeks ago, and it was for FOCAC, at the time of FOCAC. I don't know if anyone knows what FOCAC is. Maybe raise your hands. Awesome. Okay, so a couple of people. But essentially, that is the China-Africa Summit. And they had 51 heads of state, 51 presidents in Beijing for bilateral meetings with Xi Jinping and multilateral meetings. I don't know what other country could do that. US couldn't. London couldn't. And so the point is, there is a real shift in geopolitics right the way around us, and we need to understand that China's actually at the forefront of that. And what that means for us, we need to understand where we are in the world post-Brexit. And I think that's really important. And I think from there, we should maybe then define what our relationship should look like with China. One thing that's very, very clear under this new government is growth is the absolute priority. It's kickstarting economic growth. We've just seen the investment summit today where the Prime Minister, the Business Secretary, the Chancellor have all said economic growth is our #1 priority. The truth is, that doesn't come without engagement with China. And so there is the trade-off, and I think there's going to be lots of new politicians who are going to realise, actually, if we want growth, the trade-off is to work with China, and how comfortable are we doing that? And that might fit into this Labour audit that they're committing. So I think anytime you talk about China, there's such a contrast. You know, in the same sentence, you've got a contradiction here. So we're talking about pro-growth, pro-engagement. They can actually mean very, very different things for different people. So to give that really boring, dull answer, we're going to have to wait and see.
Thank you. And on that breaking news, I'm going to hand over to you, Rex, because I want to ask a little bit more about this geopolitical context that Stephen's been talking to. Because, of course, Xi Jinping's China is increasingly robust in challenging and presenting alternatives to what we might call a liberal international order that many suggest that the UK is part of. So I wonder if you could talk a bit specifically to how the UK politicians should be responding to this challenge. And also, I was hoping you could say something about what's going to happen if Trump's elected next month.
Okay, yeah, that should be very interesting. But anyway, yes. I mean, thank you for the question. I think you are absolutely right in looking at the UK's relationship with China within a broader geopolitical context. Because after all, Britain is a very important global actor, and despite Brexit, despite other developments, and I think the Labour government is talking about reconnect with the outside world, and of course, there's Europe, the United States, in Indo-Pacific, and so on and so forth. And so yes, I mean, this is very important. And of course, if you look at the Chinese side, you know, China, as we know, is a global power today, as the president mentioned earlier. And it has global aspirations, it has global interests. So you know, we cannot understand UK-China relations without making reference to the broader geopolitical environment, which is very challenging at the moment, as we know, with a lot of developments, you know, in the Ukraine, in the Middle East, and in Indo-Pacific, everywhere really. So anyway, so let me come back to your question about the liberal international order. Well, in my view, I think China has benefited enormously from the liberal international order economically, and you know, because of China's open door policy, reforming its economy, and I think the international economic order has provided China with a lot of opportunities to develop the country, to make it as powerful as it is today. However, China has been critical of the liberal international order, the political aspect of it, because China believes that this is an international order which is essentially constructed and driven by the United States and its friends and allies, the UK included. Yeah, so they're not really happy with that, and so they've been talking about reforming the international order to make it more equitable, so that the voices of developing countries, non-Western countries, could be heard. And but more recently, I think China has been much more active in constructing an alternative world order. Okay, and through a whole range of initiatives and channels, the Belt and Road Initiative, and of course, and other organizations like the BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation, organization, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot have been happening. So really, I mean, how should the UK politicians respond to that? Well, I don't think, we can stop China from doing this. And I think the challenge is there. Maybe this is what the Conservative government was talking about when they refer to systemic challenge, challenging to the system. Well, so it's a competition, really. It's a competition. So when the Labour government is now talking about challenge, you mentioned cooperate, and of course, but challenge as well. So there is a challenge, and I think we need to face up to the challenge. I think one thing we could do is to strengthen the liberal international order from our side, to make it work better, make it more attractive to countries around the world. Because, some of you would be aware, the liberal international order, has been weakened quite substantially in the last few years, both by external forces and by internal forces. The rise of populism, the emergence of right-wing movements and so on. A lot of difficulties. So, I think that's at least something we could do, and so that that we would be in a stronger position to compete. Some people might say fairly with China. It's a competition. Nothing wrong with that competition, but and we need to know who we are dealing with. And of course, I think understanding is important. Understanding China and what China is trying to do is very important, because I think there's a serious lack of understanding of this country. Although there are some very good experts, like Stephen and Winnie, in this country, and of course this institute is a center of excellence. But I think more needs to be done, really.
So does anybody else want to come back on that liberal international order, or give me a little Trump nudge? Is he going to ruin this aspiration of strengthening the liberal international order from the inside, Winnie?
Okay, so I want to, I think, from my perspective as being academic at University of Bristol, the big thing that I talk a lot about has to do with the fact that there's a lot of accusations going around in terms of what role China has in terms of undermining the international liberal order. I think we forget that when Trump was initially elected in 2016, everyone in the international system freaked out, yeah? And when Xi Jinping went to Davos for the first time, the Europeans were calling upon Xi Jinping to basically step into America's shoes. My immediate response was, do you realize what you're asking for, right? Because it's China, right? I think there's also another thing that we need to remember is the fact that China does not want to be the world leader. It doesn't, like the responsibility, I agree with you that it is taking steps to shift the international system, introducing new multilateral organizations, the Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, et cetera, but these are embedded within the United Nations, right? The Chinese recognize that their growth has come as part of, and their stability is gained from the international order in the first place. And the responsibility of being a hegemon, that not just economically, but politically, militarily, is not something that the Chinese are willing to take on, right? However, when it comes to the question of Trump versus Harris, Kamala, it really is, what is that phrase? Neither of them are particularly attractive, but neither of them are particularly bad for China. Because if you have, economically, if you have Harris winning, China will continue to be in the same situation as right now in terms of the fact that it has all the advantages in terms of it's going to continue to buy oil from Russia. The Chinese airlines are going to have a monopoly when it comes to Europe because none of the European airlines are going to fly directly to China because it's too expensive to fly around. When it comes to logistics and shipping and supply chains, China is not in the same position as other Western shipping companies because they have to go around the Cape of Good Hope, which adds on an additional 5 to 7 days, and therefore cost and delays, and the Chinese don't need to do that, right? So strategically speaking, what's going on for China economically right now in the international order works for them. I mean, there are negative sides, obviously, but you know, in terms of those kinds of factors, it's quite stable for them. So Harris isn't necessarily bad, but she is also necessarily good for them because Biden and Harris are more harsh on China and their China policy than Trump was, right? And then you have Trump coming in and you just don't know what's gonna come, right? I mean, I think he's gonna continue with like MAGA, but maybe MAGA 2.0, Make America Great Again 2.0, be far more about domestic politics and stuff like that, maybe up the ante a bit with regards to anti-Chinese rhetoric and stuff like that, but if he gets rid of wars, which I personally have no problem with, then this just does the Trump thing. It's the wild cardness of it, which is what I worry about.
If I can just jump in, I think if you speak to anyone from Washington, the only thing that they can agree with at the moment is around China, whether it be Republican or Democrats. Their stance is completely hardened on China, both in the administration right now and what potentially might come in. So I think Harris or Trump, they'll have basically the same strategy. With Trump, you have the adage of maybe ripping up or wanting to rip up multilateral systems, which is always the challenge. The one thing I will say is, personal opinion, but if you start to bring in tariffs could be a race to the bottom, which I think would be a bit of a challenge. The other aspect of things, if you flip it back around and look at China, I mean, they really have doubled down on, the United Nations, WTO, and all these sort of geopolitical actors that kind of give them legitimacy. And I think that the challenge is they want it on their own terms. So, WTO, they have flouted rules continuously in many ways, but ultimately they were never called out. And I think everyone allowed them to use the WTO, wanted them in the tent, because they thought they would reform them and become more liberal. And that just never happened. And they said from the outset, never going to happen. But I think people thought, nah, it's going to happen. They want to be democratic. They want this. And it just never happened in the way that I think the global West thought it would be. And I think China does absolutely want to be a global player, but its number one priority is China. And I think that's always going to be the thing that China comes back to, is what's in China's best interest. So they do want to be a geopolitical player. They do want to be a world leader. But with that, and I think the big challenge that they're realizing now, you do have to become a global actor. You have to step into that void in regards to diplomacy when they don't want to. And I think that is a problem that they're facing, because they are actively pushing to be the global leader in so many ways. But they also don't want to comment on things. And I think ultimately that is the role often that the US has played. And so they want to change the terms of reference, which I think is difficult.
So, as many of my students in this room will know, I'm always telling people to unpack what we mean and who we're talking about when we talk about China. And I want to shift us on to talk a little bit about the business-to-business relationship that you mentioned, Stephen. And I was hoping that you, who have your finger on the pulse of UK business in a way that few of us do, could talk a little bit to us about how businesses in the UK are, I think, very widely now revising their China strategy. Could you tell us a bit about what they're doing and why they're doing it?
Sure. So I think if I just start with an anecdote, which is probably the number one priority for business, which is stability. So when I was previously with the British Chamber of Commerce, we would conduct a sentiment survey. And we would pulse British businesses, how optimistic, pessimistic, neutral are they about the relationship. And this survey was conducted right in the middle of Liz Truss's premiership. And when I mean right in the middle, she resigned right in the middle. So literally the first, 4 weeks of responses, incredibly pessimistic, incredibly negative about the relationship, the future of the relationship. After 4 weeks, more neutrality, a bit more optimism. A very similar survey is conducted here by the Chinese Chamber of Commerce in the UK, pulsing Chinese businesses about the UK market. Now, I personally think it's slightly different because it's a completely open market, but the facts remain, they were incredibly pessimistic and negative about the previous government, and then they've shifted their optimism under this new government. And what I think is really clear from that is when you're talking about relationships in China, when you're talking about business, top-down is really important. So the signals that you're getting from government is absolutely critical to the business environment. So I think stability is absolutely paramount. So I just went back to China. I think one thing that was really clear, it hit me in the face, was everyone's concern around the economy. And that's very different things to different people, because in many ways the economy is doing phenomenal if you're involved in sort of emerging technologies, EVs, the green economy. But if you're involved in house building, you're in real difficulty. So I don't want to generalize talking about the economy, but every single person to me, whether it's Chinese national, foreign business, was really concerned about the economy. So if you're a foreign business in China, you will be doing your absolute due diligence of how to engage in this market post-COVID, where overcapacity is up, kind of spending is down, and what that means for your future trajectory. How do you, data regulation is changing in China. How do you keep your businesses regulated to the right degree? So, are you really just formulating in China for China strategy that we've kind of all heard, but is that the way that business is moving forward? So I think that's something to really note. And then the other aspect of things that, again, when we talk about China, we think it's not this monolith. There's not this one man pulling all the puppet strings. There's 32 provinces. They have very, very different economies. They have very, very different regulations. And I think some parts of China are doing good. Some parts are really struggling. And any business would be doing their due diligence of how to engage. I'll tell one more story before I hand on. I got back to the UK, and not this university, but another university asked me, we're going to sign this agreement with a Chinese university. What do you think? And I was like, well, okay. I mean, what's your global strategy? And they said, oh, well, we don't really have any global strategy. We don't do anything in other countries. We don't do anything in America. I said, so why this university? He said, well, they contacted us and said we'd make an absolute fortune if we collaborated. And I was like, so that's your strategy? Literally a salesman calls you up and says, you can make money if you collaborate with us. And it's like, China is the land of opportunity, but it's the most sophisticated, dynamic, competitive market on the planet. You have to do your due diligence before you go in there, and you have to do your due diligence to really not be kind of kicked out and have a kind of a you know, terrible story coming back to the UK. So I think any business right now is riding out what was previously a 10% GDP to sort of, you know, anywhere between, I don't know, 0.5 to 4%. You know, they've got to change their strategy.
Thank you, Stephen. Rex, I want to come back to you on how the UK government might relate to this tricky environment for business, and especially to ask you, do you think there is a smooth way to balance this promotion of trade relations on the one hand with an increasing perception that some kind of UK values or security-related interests need to be protected?
Yes, yes. Well, I think there isn't a smooth way of doing it. If anything, I think it will be very challenging. You know, I think more attention needs to be paid to the trade-off, you know, between economic benefits or interests and security concerns. And obviously, you know, there are a lot of people in this country are concerned about the China challenge, whatever that means, which includes the security dimension, yeah, and whether you're talking about investment, you know, in a nuclear power station in this country, or whether you're talking about China's activities in the South China Sea and Taiwan, and the implications, the economic trade implications for you know, not just Indo-Pacific countries, but for Western countries like the UK, because you know, we have a strong, you know, trade interest in that region, and I mean, after all, China, you know, China is the 6th largest trade partner of the UK. I mean, last year it was the 4th largest trade partner of the UK. So, you know, it is a difficult, I mean, in a way it is a dilemma. It is a difficult challenge. But nevertheless, it's not something that you can just, you know, brush aside and you know, if you don't think about it, it'll go away. It won't go away because I think, as Stephen mentioned, you know, China is, you know, the China market is enormously competitive. Same as the, you know, the Chinese approach to trade affairs. I mean, it's not easy to do, you know, to trade with China. You mentioned one university. I think that's, you know, that really, I think it's typical actually, because a lot of businesses or universities, they think, oh wow, you know, here's a China market so big, there must be some money to be made. Let's, you know, jump on it. But it's not that easy, you know. It's really not that easy. There are many sad stories, but anyway, we don't want to talk about that. But yes, I would just say that I think whether it's sort of government officials, particularly the Labour Party now, and indeed, parliamentarians, I think we need to pay more attention to the trade-off between the economic side and the security side, and really think about it. What is it that we are looking for? And what is the most effective way of getting what we want? And, you know, you can't have the cake and eat it, you know. You can't have both, you know. Well, lots of money, you know, from the China market, but no security risk, you know. Well, I mean, I think the Labour government is mindful of the risk associated with engaging with China today. And I think, you know, I believe that, you know, that one of the think tanks advising the government is actually from an organization focusing on strategic risk, you know, in engaging with China. So I do think the Labour government is aware of this, but you know, we don't know what happens to the audience. Too early to say. But it will be really interesting to, you know, to find out this and you know, to know more about that. But it's something we need to think about.
Thank you, and it's nice that you, I think, also highlight for us who sit in academia the kind of variety of experience that institutions have of engaging with China, which is why क्षितिज here is so lucky to have the best and biggest China centre in the UK on its side. I want to pick up on this academic and people-to-people relationship by turning to you, Stephen, because I know you've expressed some concern about British people's low level of engagement with China, both in a professional and personal capacity. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about those concerns, as well as what you think can be done to make you less concerned about that lack of engagement.
Yeah, so where to start? So I went to China as a 22-year-old. I thought I'd be there for 6 months, ended up staying 12 years. That's actually a relatively common story. A lot of people went to China, they were an English teacher, and then sort of were just bowled over by the country. Those people are now the ambassadors, the business leaders, the CEOs, and so it's absolutely critical that we have that flow of people into China and here in the UK. I think I was chatting to one of my former colleagues, Chung Kai. He was at Schwartzman. In 2022, granted this was the height of COVID, the COVID pandemic, there was 2 new British students in China, 2. And they were both on the Schwartzman Scholarship. How they got in, I don't know. But that's, I think there's about 300 new students there now. I think there's about 8,000 to 10,000 students, not here, but, learning Chinese language in the UK, GCSE or A-level. Most of them are Chinese nationals. We are just not engaging in this people-to-people cultural exchange. And that's not a tap you just turn back on and you have all these experts, That's really, really worrying. How we can make sure that we understand soon to be possibly the largest economy, one of the most important geopolitical players of our lifetime, if we're not investing in China capabilities, if we're not investing in the people-to-people connections. We have a really strained relationship with China now. It won't get better by not engaging. I'm not someone who is pro-China. I'm not someone who's negative on China. I'm a realist on China. It's like a gravity, right? It's not going to fall off a map as much as Ian Duncan Smith wants. It's still going to be there tomorrow, and we have to understand how we deal with such a sophisticated country. And it starts with the people-to-people. So for me, we need to invest more in institutions like the Lau Institute. We need to invest in more students going to China, engaging in China. It's not just about the language. The language is a gateway to the culture, to really understanding what China is. But unless we do that, it will get a lot worse. And, you can see that on every single level of society. Look at government. How many government ministers, how many new politicians have engagement with China? I mean, I think you can count them on one hand, maybe 2. Then you break that down into civil servants. Again, how many senior civil servants have a real grasp of what China is? And then you break that down again into media, into civil society. That is a worry for me, right? And we will not get a better relationship or a better understanding with China if we don't engage. So for me, it's absolutely paramount. I want more people to go over there and understand it and go clear-eyed. It's really important that we go clear-eyed to what this country is and how we can deal with it. So for me, it's paramount. It's really critical. It's something the UK government should absolutely invest in. If we did it tomorrow, it's almost too late. So it's really important.
Thank you. Winnie, I'm going to turn to you for the last word before we open up to Q&A, to give us your real take-home points from our discussion today. So for the people in this room who are part of this people-to-people that we are, what would be your key take-home points for people here to take with them?
That's me. Okay. I think I want to link back to the title for the China Week. Yeah. So whether the China model, the economic, developmental, and social challenges facing China today. And I want to flip it on its head and say basically the economic, developmental, and social challenges facing UK today if we ignore China. Yeah. I think the thing that we forget is that while tensions between US and China were quite severe, they continue to communicate. And I wouldn't call the tensions between us were severe. I think no one really paid attention. And because no one really paid attention to China, there was literally not literally, there was very little communication, okay? And the thing that we forget is that even if we don't communicate with China, China will continue to do what China does, right? China is a long-term, long-planning, very strategically organized entity. And yes, it is not a monolith. I'm just talking about in terms of if we're looking at it in terms of foreign policy, if we're looking in terms of their goals economically. You can just look at when it came to the ban on Huawei and ZTE, what happened within a year, Huawei has their own operating system. Why? Because they knew it was coming. They can see it, right? And if we tried, we could see it. We can see what's coming, and we can see where we can work together. We can see where our red lines are, and there has to be, yeah? There are areas within UK that need to be all about national security. There is no doubt about that, and we need to be realistic about that. But there are definitely areas where we can communicate and cooperate. AI governance is definitely one of those, right? China's leadership in green tech and sustainable development is definitely one of those. China's concerns about its demographic issues has led to its concerns about its healthcare issues. We have concerns about our NHS. It's definitely one of those areas. Pharmaceuticals, right? It doesn't have to be a all or nothing. We either engage or we don't engage. There's lots of scope where we can, yeah? And I think the people to people definitely is one way to do it. I'm gonna give you an example. You may not like it, but it's a matter of fact. I know because I did my PhD dissertation on it. Taiwan and China are like this politically. Oh, you can film me. Yeah, so they're at loggerheads, yeah? Sorry, sometimes I forget that sometimes, okay, whatever. So they're at loggerheads, right? But Taiwan is the only economy in Asia that has a trade surplus with China. Taiwan is the only economy in Asia that has such intensive economic, social, cultural, academic exchanges and engagement with China. There's definitely over 500,000, probably closer to 750,000 Taiwanese, mainland Chinese marital unions, yeah? As much as most Asian economies are experiencing demographic concerns about birth rates and stuff like that, actually, the Taiwanese and the mainland Chinese couples produce the most children, yeah? That's just, you know. And what this has done is, as much as there's a lot of geopolitical tensions between Taiwan and China, particularly right now, there are a lot of different external factors which play into that, which I'm not going to get into. They have a very solid, stable relationship in the socioeconomic arena, yeah? And that's not something to sniff at. There's a lot of value to that, because then you're invested. Yeah? I'm not saying that British people should go marry all the Chinese people. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you engage, you communicate. Whether it's at primary school level and you just have kids that are Chinese or Chinese, British kids going to China for field trips, you know, whatever it may be. At multiple levels, there's areas to engage. One key issue, however, is that we have to inform ourselves. And one issue we have in the area of informing ourselves is the role that media has in that. And that media has a responsibility to tell the full story, which is what we traditionally turn to the media for. And I think we've had problems with that in the past when it comes to discussions around China.
Thank you very much, Winnie. I'd love to hear a lot more from this panel, but we need to also hand over to questions from the audience to guide what we're going to get you guys to talk about. So we've got a microphone around the room, yeah? So maybe gentlemen here at the front to start with. If you could all please introduce yourselves briefly when you speak. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Roger Kramers from Leiden University, an affiliate with the Laos Centre. Thank you, Kerry. As an EU citizen, one of the things that I found very absent from the discussion is the E word. To what extent is there still a meaningful UK-China relationship, and where does the UK think it might need to work with the rest of this continent? And I know it's a bit of a touchy subject. But to what extent is there an EU dimension to some of those global governance challenges that we outline, or bilateral economic trade challenges? And how do you see under this new government that some of those shared concerns or joint interests might be materialized? Thank you.
I think we'll take a group of 3 questions. So can I see another hand up? Lady over here, please.
Hi, I'm a former PKU graduate from the Yenching Academy, and I really was interested in your point at the end about how oftentimes the China-Taiwan conflict can be overly talked about by the media as a geopolitical hotspot in the world, and that you think topics such as the economy or the interconnectedness between mainland and Taiwan or social familial relations should be incorporated to tell the full picture. And I do agree that the media has definitely really latched on to this kind of geopolitical hot point, but I'm wondering, in your opinion, if that story needs to be told, not just on a level such as in a small classroom discussion or a panel like this, who is going to tell that story and change a public perception on that level? Because I, as someone who's lived in China and who is American, really doubt or see a lack of someone who would be willing to put themselves out there, or a group or organization to do that.
Thank you. Adrian Farina, I'm a marketing consultant with an interest on China as a brand. And related to this, the 2 points that Stephen and Wendy made, and a little bit of what she just mentioned, the limitation of these people-to-people engagements is, in my view, in large part for the limited perception we have in the West of what China is, and influenced by media and just a singular narrative. So I'm curious on why we don't see more proactivity from Chinese authorities, what normally governments do, which is either through promoting tourism, promoting culture, promoting, or even helping their flagship brands position themselves. Why we see so little effort in that front to, let's say, using marketing terms, reposition the China brand?
I'll go down the line. So, Winnie, if you want to come first.
Okay. So just really quickly, Taiwan, China, it is a hotspot. Don't mistake me. It is, and as long as anyone tries to broach any kind of red line that China has on Taiwan, it is a hotspot. The idea of changing perceptions on the basis of people-to-people relations, they just want to live their lives. Yeah, it's not a campaign for them, right? So changing perceptions, finding someone who's willing to put their head above the parapet to say, you know, grandstand something. I don't think it's, I think right now there's too much tension to take that stance. Yeah. On the EU, Labour has made it very clear, Starmer's made it very clear that they are very interested in the European Union and re-engaging with Europe. But I think with regards to China, China engages with Europe on a bilateral basis, right? I mean, obviously they do engage with Europe as the entity, but they tend to engage with member states on a bilateral basis. So, and Europe itself is quite divided on how it wants to engage with China, quite significantly divided. Yeah, even the big three are very, very divided. So I think for the UK to come in and say, let's all work together, it's problematic because of 2016 and Brexit. The UK is not in that position, doesn't have that authority anymore. I think if it's going to work together with European nation states on the basis of China, it would do it again bilaterally and maybe trilaterally, like a triangle, to find commonality where they can work together. If we still had, I'm speculating, if we still had in another alternative universe, Hinkley Point, then you would have UK, France, and China, right? But maybe there are prospects in other areas. Brand China. I think since COVID, that's not really been an option. It's been the whole idea of traveling to China has been undermined by the war in Ukraine and the cost of flights and direct flights and European flights going there are particularly problematic. Most people that I speak to are not particularly comfortable. This is not my opinion. I'm just saying with flying Chinese airlines. They want to fly European airlines. Yeah. And the kind of spillover effects of what happened with COVID and the diplomatic, stuff going around that, the claims about, the discussions about human rights and Xinjiang and Uyghurs and genocide, like all this comes into play, It's very difficult to de-link a branding from a lot of the narrative and the rhetoric that's been going on in media around China recently. I think that it makes it more difficult that way, particularly in terms of attracting tourism. Yeah. Though TikTok has been very, very effective for attracting the youth to do that. So, that I think there's means and mechanisms to achieve it that way.
Thanks, Winnie. Keeping in mind that we've seen a lot of hands up with more questions from the audience, do you want to add anything to that, Stephen?
Yeah, I'll be very, very brief. So, all small topics: Taiwan, EU, China PR. So, if I was the Chinese government, the thing I'd invest in the most is a really good PR company, because they're bloody awful at doing it. Like going abroad, going outbound, they are so bad. They do such great things, and they're very reactive rather than proactive. So if I was China, I'd really invest in a PR company. COVID really hurt them. I don't think they realised how isolated they were to the rest of the world. And I think what we've seen, again, another anecdote, I used to host roundtables with British CEOs of British businesses. So I'd say, 8 years ago, they'd all be British nationals. Now they're all Chinese nationals. Everything has been localised. So I think China genuinely has a lot to do here. And I think they've realised that. I think COVID's really hurt them. I think they're really struggling for investment. I think there's very few foreigners going there. So it's on China's interest to really engage with the rest of the world. So they've got something to do there. I'm not, sometimes I'm putting a lot of this at the UK government. China's got a lot to account for as well. So PR company, quite important. To Taiwan, obviously I think it's, it could be the flashpoint of our lifetimes. I think let's take it from a business perspective. I guarantee you big business is doing risk analysis, risk management. Government isn't, and I think that's quite a big concern. I think there needs to be a lot more thinking about what would happen if those flights that took all around Taiwan today actually went to an invasion. What's government actually going to do about that? Business, I think, would have quite clear answers. Government might not, and I think that's a real serious conversation that needs to take place in the UK government. On EU and China, I think these conversations are taking place. I just don't think they're as public in the forefront. I mean, I remember from a chamber perspective, I was absolutely talking to my counterparts about where we can cooperate. I think China has the best diplomats on the planet. They're so good at dividing up and conquering. So they don't deal with the European Union as a bloc. They deal with it in individual companies and get what they want, and then give the interests of the country. So I think a little bit more cooperation and collaboration can definitely go. I think the big flashpoint, the big challenge of this new UK government will be around EVs. Do we follow what the Europeans have done? Do we follow what the Americans have done? Who knows? But on the other aspect of things, let's not also forget how much we actually cooperate with China. We're both part of the P5, which is actually pretty fundamental to upholding our global order, which is pretty paramount. If we're talking about climate change, we have to work with China when it comes to global compacts, global governance, when we're talking about the UN. So there are areas that we cooperate with the EU and China, but it's definitely a challenge that I think a lot more thinking has to go into it. But it's what the new government is going to do. It's going to sort it all out in 5 years.
Rex, do you want to add to that?
Yes, just a few quick words. Regarding the EU dimension in UK-China relationship. There's no doubt that the EU or Europe is a key focus for the Labour government, but I'm not sure the government is too interested in thinking about working with the EU in dealing with China, or at least not at the moment. It's not its priority really. But one thing I think we can learn from the EU, from Europe, is that they despite their difficult relationship with China, they've been engaging with China. They have visit from their most senior politicians, and that hasn't been happening in the UK. So really, I think we can learn something from the EU, from Europe, but I'm not sure that we would be working closely with the EU for all the reasons that, you know, that you both mentioned. Regarding China-Taiwan relationship, I mean, it is a hot spot. I mean, you know, you know, if anything happens in the Taiwan Strait, I think, you know, a lot of people may not be aware that I think we will all be affected.
Oh, yeah.
You know, seriously, you know, I mean, you just, you know, think about it, you know, Taiwan, you know, it provides semiconductors, you know, for most of the advanced technologies that we're using, mobile phone and everything, you know, and I mean, it's going to be really disruptive. So I think really, you know, it's not good, you know, just to say that, well, we support the democratic cause in Taiwan. I think we need to think more seriously about, you know, whether and to what extent are we willing and able to get involved in this, you know, in a crisis in the Taiwan Strait, and how do we deal with this, and in what ways we could possibly work with our allies and so on and so forth. And more importantly, to try to think of ways of avoiding a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, you know, how to prevent a China-Taiwan crisis and a war, because we, you know, I mean, you just can't imagine what would happen. I mean, well, I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but it's going to be disastrous. It's going to be a war between China and Taiwan tomorrow. And then, of course, you know, that I agree with, you know, with both of you, you know, regarding people-to-people engagement. You know, I mean, I think we a lot more we could do. Really.
Well, we can't end on that miserable Taiwan note, so I'm going to invite a couple of more questions from the audience. I won't be able to take all questions, but please keep in mind that we will all be delighted to chat to you over drinks very shortly. First lady up there, in there.
Hi there. So my name is Claire. I'm an ex-China scholar, but now I moved back to civil service. I'm very interested in the comments that you made regarding the government's attitude towards de-risking. I think it's particularly clear that we have key dependencies on China, and that is not an option just to walk away, and that we do need to engage. But given that we do have such key dependencies on this country, and given, apologies, I know we want to move away from the kind of depressing Taiwan breakdown scenarios, but then what is the, how do we balance this moving forward then? Should this be that we should continue to see China as a land of opportunity and continue to engage? Or should governments across the world, the UK and otherwise, should we be thinking more in terms of de-risking and trying to move against these dependencies? And does the UK, should the UK be looking at this more as a bilateral China-UK relationship, or should we more be at the mercy of, say, wider geopolitics and what our partners are doing likewise?
Thank you. And then we've got a gentleman here at the front.
Hi everyone, my name is Subain Abdi. I work for Wilton Park, so executive agency of the FCDO, civil servant, awesome job. One of the key things I actually wanted to ask, and I think a few people have already touched upon it, is that people-to-people thing. And I want you to sort of zero in a bit more on the specifics on that. One thing that I'm conscious of is sometimes when we talk about that people-to-people thing, a lot of the time there's a demographic shift. Young people are a lot more sort of willing to engage with this narrative with China as a good place to engage, maybe technology-wise or with education and so on. But the biggest problem is those 50 and over, maybe or 40 and over. The British Foreign Policy Group recently had a public opinion survey. One of the key things is China is more receptive. The idea of China is more receptive with younger people. They're an okay demographic. We don't need to target them as much. But how can we target more, I would say, the 40, 50-year-olds who have this entrenched idea that China is a risk, a constant risk, and if we don't do that, then that people-to-people idea might not really take off. So yeah, a bit of a shambles, but that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to try to keep your answers to 1 minute. Rex, do you want to start?
Yes, I mean, I think regarding the questions of dependency on China, Yes, I think to a large extent, I think we are dependent on China, in a sense that that we have a very sort of close trade relationship with the country, and a lot of the products that we're using every day, they are coming from China. And this is why I think it is very important to think about what if we are having a very difficult relationship with China. I mean, of course, there are security concerns which we need to take into account. But we need to think about the plans, I mean, so this is part of the long-term strategy, you think about the cost and benefits really, and how do we mitigate the circumstances, when there are big troubles with China, how do we deal with this? I mean, it's and this is why that I think some people have suggested that, well, I think the easiest way to do is not become less dependent on China, but that's not easy, not easy to do. I mean, are we saying that therefore we are not trading? We should be trading less with China? I mean, it's it's a difficult situation really, and de-risking, well. Something to seriously consider. No simple answer to that, I'm afraid, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Rex. Stephen, briefly from you, please.
Briefly, okay. So, people to people, read Kerry Brown's books. You can pay me later. No, but seriously, it's a great question. I'm sure, I don't know how many people in this room, 100 people. I'm sure there's so many people who completely disagree with everything that's come out of my mouth. And there's some people who might agree with me. And that's brilliant. That's what democracy is about. That's what platforms are exactly about, right? We need more public debate and discourse on China, more understanding that will go to the conversation, more robust dialogue. So that's absolutely critical, because you're right. A lot of the stories I said was about young people going there. I went there as a young guy. So a couple of things. We need more China capabilities. You're at Wilton Park, FCDO. We need more capabilities going into funding to understand that. And that might be people in this room coming in and speaking to you. Not a form of McCarthyism, that if you engage with China, somehow you might be a detriment and a spy. I don't think that's going to be helpful. So I think we need more engagement with China expertise about people who have come back. MPs, they're pretty low literacy on China. So stuff that the GBCC do around capability building, China capability building. Formerly, the All-Party Parliamentary China Group would go out and understand and explore China. We need more of that. We don't want to be weaponizing diplomacy. For example, when Cleverly went out, he was called a China stooge. He's the foreign secretary engaging with the second largest economy on the planet. I think that's incredibly damaging and detrimental to public discourse in the UK. So I think we need to think about our language. Businesses, I am worried about the localization, and I think businesses are worried about the localization. So China needs to understand that. I think when we are talking about entrenched views, I'm not going to change everyone's opinion in this room, and that's absolutely fine. But hopefully you'll understand that we're coming at it from a slightly different perspective. But we can, agree to disagree agreeably, or whatever it's called. But public discourse absolutely paramount to that. So we need more things like this. And I think we need more people putting their head above the parapet to not be shot down that they have a different opinion. So I think that's really important. When we're talking about de-risking, I think it's really difficult, because what do you mean by de-risking? Are you asking HSBC to pull out of China? If you are, you cripple this country. So I think you need to really understand what de-risking means and why we'd be doing it. I think we need to understand clear-eyed, which is a bit of a generic statement, what that means. We need to be clear-eyed with engagement on China. And I think we need to also define some of, existential questions we're about to face. For example, is AI going to be the next nuclear bomb, or is it going to be a bit like electricity that we can trade? If it's the next nuclear bomb, we've got to stop working with China. If it's electricity, we can engage. So there's a lot of it's not black or white, and I think a lot of thinking needs to go to this, and a lot of kind of closed door thinking needs to go to this, but a lot more public discourse is good for this type of thing.
Even more briefly, last words from you, Winnie.
I was going to just stick with buy Kerry's book.
People to people is a long-term thing. It needs consistency. And while the youth are great at engaging with China, they see a certain side of China. So they need to also do not see the whole story as well, right? So everyone just needs to see the whole story. So yeah, read Carrie's book. Read it, just basically engage with China any way you can. But obviously with open eyes, yeah? On the idea of, I think your question really points to what I was trying to say is, what you're suggesting is an all or nothing, again, right? And it's like, do we engage with them? Do we diversify? Do we move away from them? And it will inevitably take a mix of everything, because it just depends on what area is considered key national security areas and what areas we can actually diversify. And there will be areas where we want to, but it's just not possible, right? And that may be because actually China's already got it locked, because China's been working on a certain sector for so long, right? And so we have to be realistic about it. I think the national security issues need to be considered and need to be considered seriously, because I don't think we've identified clear enough about what our red lines are. And once those are decided, then clearly from there, we identify ones where we can start to engage, and how that comes into play, whether it's a partner or the partner, becomes the question, right? I think it's really important to try and understand that our dependency may be a dependency, but there may be a mutual dependency as well, right? So if we're talking about AI governance, China's really, really keen on AI governance. We're very, very keen on it. There's a mutual dependency there. China cannot go it alone, because it's an international initiative. And the UK has a lot of scope, to basically play a very, very large role, which to a certain extent, ever since Trump has came in, I'm not predicting anything, America has stepped back from the multilateral scene quite a bit. And there is so much opportunity for the UK we're here. Let's go. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, should we give everybody a clap? Yeah.